So when we thought about the 5th anniversary, I have a close group of advisors that we get together and talk about our speakers and why we invite certain people. I asked, well, who do you think from the first 5 years we should invite back? The number one person was Lynn Casey. I've had a lot of people that I've worked with. I consider Lynn to be my favorite boss, even though I know she hates that word. Lynn saw in me something that I didn't see in myself. I was this exuberant, overzealous young professional. And I walked into the halls of Padilla Spear Beardsley, and Lynn understood me. She taught me how to think. And up until that point, I really didn't think I knew how to think very well. And so when we talked about her coming back, I called her and I said, hey, can we have a beer together? And she said, you know, let's do something better that's more aligned with 7Fs. Let's walk around Lake Harriet. So we met and we walked around Lake Harriet, and I said, you know, here's where we're at. Here's where we're going. And we got together and we asked, you know, would you be our 5th anniversary speaker? And she said yes. And she has a lot of interesting things to share since when she spoke with us in November of 2011. So please give a warm Good Leadership Breakfast welcome to Lynn Casey.
I am so humbled by that. I don't even know what to say, except I'll just throw it right back at you, Paul. Paul taught me that if you can challenge, really be tough with somebody, and if that toughness is coming from a place of love, that person will be better for it. And you know, growing up in North Dakota and Minnesota, been here since '77, we don't always know how to do that because we're raised to be nice and we're raised to be polite. And what I learned with Paul in challenging this person that I thought had more potential than just about anybody else in our firm was that part of being a person of integrity is making sure that not only do you bring forward and compliment people for all the wonderful gifts that they've been given, that they've been able to grow. And Paul, as you can see, has many. But also to challenge them to be their best selves in every way. So you gave me a great gift, an absolutely fabulous gift. And I knew you would leave someday. And thank God you did, because this is absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. So the first time I was here, it wasn't actually here, it was at, where was it? Minnesota Valley. And I remember being on stage and thinking, wow, there's such a great vibe in this room. And I just sort of figured because it was Minnesota Valley. Well, it's not Minnesota Valley. Now it's Golden Valley, and I realize that it's all of you in this room because you are bringing yourselves to this breakfast. So thank you so much. So I'm wondering if any of you who are supervisors, who have supervised people, ever had the experience of one of your first supervisory training programs where the facilitator asked you to name your favorite leader, somebody who super inspired you in your personal life or your professional life, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I always hated that question because I didn't grow up with great leader role models. And when I was in 3rd grade, my family got transferred to Fargo, North Dakota, and we were a faith-based family, so we joined our parish right away, moved across from the Catholic school, and the priest, of course, in those days was really the head of the household for just about anybody who was Catholic, especially in a smaller community. Well, this particular priest was hardly what you consider the role model of leadership. Although when you're growing up, when you're in grade school, your priest truly is the person that you look up to. And this particular person obviously was a man of faith, cared deeply about his flock. But he had this way about him that brought everything back to him. And I remember there were times in church where somebody actually had to leave after communion. And that wasn't a mortal sin, that wasn't even a venial sin, but you could tell from the altar, this guy took it so personally, and he would absolutely stop the Mass, stop people's train of thought, and tell people to get back in their seats. Church is not over, he would say. And, that was really tough, because what it did was, here was this leader, and it was kind of all about him. And then a year later, he ran off with his secretary. So, first introduction to leaders, right there you have it. So my parents were not managers of anything. My father and mother were from a union organizing family. So they brought a particular bias that was truly based on some personal experiences back in those days about leadership at the corporate level. And my father worked for an oil company. He was a sales guy, a really good sales guy. But back in those days, those people were not treated with a lot of respect. And he would come home from this oil company's annual meeting, where he would be flown to Houston, where they all were back in the day. And his job was to carry the bags of the senior executives and the board that were arriving from points elsewhere. And that was what he did. So he became a porter for a week while they pretty much met and partied. And I know we'd go off every year, and I thought it was cool. You're going to Houston, this is great. And he'd come back and he wouldn't talk about it when I was young. And later, when I got my first job in a corporation, and he was a little disappointed about that, because he thought I was going to sell out, he unloaded to me about what actually happened down in Houston. These kinds of things don't happen anymore. But if you can remember the Tyco CEO way back in the day and all of the shenanigans, multiply that by maybe tenfold and you have what was going on. They actually had in the hotels floors blocked off for very high-paid single women to entertain the guests of the CEO, and that's what my dad had to deal with. So that was my corporate experience, my corporate leadership experience. My father telling me those stories. So it was a kind of a disappointing situation for him when my first job out of grad school was at the Burlington Northern. And I promised him that if I was ever going to supervise anybody, that I was ever going to lead anything, which of course back then was the furthest thing from my mind, that I would be a different leader than I certainly experienced in my parish and that my dad experienced in his job. So I have tried to do that. It was interesting working on a railroad, and back in those days, anybody from the B on here? Most everybody has left, of course. The company in about 81, which is about halfway through my tenure there, brought a leader in who was an extraordinarily effective leader. He came from the airlines. His job was to break up the company, and it was the first time I heard the word shareholder value. So it wasn't done in the greatest of finesse, but the stockholders made a lot of money. And in the end, the Burlington Northern did split itself apart and left. And by the time the railroad was left, the CEO at the time was from Texas, so decided to just pick up and move the business down to Dallas-Fort Worth. So that was a time in about 1983 where I decided I'd probably had enough. I didn't want to move south, so it was time to cross over to the other side and become a consultant. So I joined a public relations agency. And the thing about PR firms, and really most professional services firms, especially in those days, there was really no management training. There was no leadership development. There was really nothing. It was a sink or swim philosophy. You were promoted based on what you knew and how good a consultant you were, and it was really kind of a sink or swim sort of a deal. And there's a lot of agencies that practice that today. We are not one of them because of the experience that I had. So I knew there must be a better way. I just didn't know kind of how to do that. But it really didn't matter because this was the early 90s and we were growing like crazy. And if somebody wasn't the greatest supervisor, that's all right. That person would leave and we'd get somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't pay too much attention to those kinds of things, leadership training, management training. And for me, that was fine because one of my jobs was to tend to our clients, which were growing like crazy outside of our market. So the kids were born, and 2 of them, and I was on the road. And this was a really tough one for me because I didn't think that I could have kids medically. And when it turned out that I could, I just poured everything there was into making sure that they were going to be okay. And my son was born at 28 weeks without those miracle drugs back in 1988. He probably died in my arms 6 times the first year that he was born. We had him on all the monitors, et cetera, but it was really, really tough, touch and go. So that was, he's very precious to me in ways that I never thought I would be able to experience. And at the time, when somebody's dying in your arms, you don't think about how precious that is, but afterwards, you realize it was quite a gift because that kept me completely tethered to the idea of motherhood. So, and number 2, I actually was in the hospital for 4.5 months, actually 2.5 months, holding her inside at about 19 weeks, and then 2 more months at home with meds. So the thought that I was on the road, building our business and serving clients, and my kids were back home, starting to realize that I was gone, was just a really heavy burden to bear. So when my predecessor approached me in about the late 90s and said, how would you like to take over the company? I got a planet, I'm going to be out in a couple of years. I freaked out because I thought on one hand, I really do want to get off the road. I really want to get off the road for a while. I want to spend a little bit more time with my family. I want to relieve my wonderful, wonderful spouse of some of those duties, and it was really time. On the other hand, I thought that's a pretty selfish reason for wanting to take over a company. And I had to admit to John that I knew nothing about leadership. And of course, what John said to me, remember what I told you about PR firms? Oh, that's okay. You don't have to know anything about leadership. I just felt like I really did. There was this thing called the internet. There was a whole bunch of really great thought leadership around what public relations firms and communications agencies could do with the internet in order to help organizations reach and communicate with the people who were important to them. And I knew that if we were going to, as an agency, fully tap that potential, we were going to have to make some sea changes. So I really didn't know if I was going to be up for that or not. So I disregarded what John said, and I put some of my performance bonus into going to the Center for Creative Leadership Development Program. Raise your hands if you've been exposed to that at all. It's a great program. Back then, it was probably as close to the 7 F's as you can get in a leadership program. I would say, couldn't hold a candle to what you're doing here. But it got as close as you could get in a secular program to helping people realize their full potential as a leader. So imagine me coming in, not having the greatest leadership role models, and being among a cohort of people. Most of them were not there by choice. They were there because somebody saw leadership potential in them. And they, they were heading a division. Maybe they're going to go up into the business unit level, but there was some sort of something holding them back. So it was fascinating because I was there by choice, but I knew that there was everything holding me back. Well, it turns out after we got shrunk for several days, and after we shrunk each other, a lot of different kinds of exercises, that I realized the thing that was holding me back from being a good leader was myself. And it was all of those old tapes that talked about command and control, that talked about never being really yourself, no good days, no bad days, never having anybody see you sweat, always being the smartest person in the room. That thing about hiring people who are smarter than you, forget about it. Not in my experience. As well as just being kind and good, and not worrying about hierarchy and who's up and who's down. Well, all of that was in my head. And for the first 2 days of the 4.5-day leadership program, I had to get all of that out of my head so I could be receptive to how it would be to be a different kind of a leader. Fortunately, there was a concept that was old and became new again that the center was following and really pushing, and it was a concept called servant leadership. And the light bulb went on. And I realized I didn't have to be anything that I wasn't. If I'm chosen to be a leader, if that's what people see in me, I need to start seeing it in myself, and I need to be the most authentic leader I can be. And that's what servant leadership is all about. Servant leadership is probably not the mantle that you're going to place on somebody who, at the age of 5, wants to be Pope and that's all they want to be, okay? Or wants to lead something someday, is running for class president way before their time. It's just, it's not that way at all. It's almost inside-out leadership. It is leading from the back of the room. It's leading without drawing attention to yourself. It's leading because you see the goodness in people. And being as inspirational as you can, because you know that it's not about you, it's going to be about the people in that room and around that table who are going to make something happen. And never, ever asking somebody to do what you wouldn't do yourself. And day 3 of that leadership program, another light bulb went on, and I realized I did know a good leader, except I never thought of him as a leader, because he was a coach. He was my swim team coach in Fargo, North Dakota, who coached us to the semifinals of the Junior Olympics on a relay team. And he was a guy named Tom. I don't think I ever knew his last name. He was only Coach Tom. And we didn't know too much about him, except the parents would fill us in every once in a while. We knew that he was in Korea. We knew that he came back. We knew that he was the leader of a squadron. And we knew that he took bullets for his folks. And that's what we knew. What we saw every day was somebody who, and those of you who have been coached by bad coaches get how different this was. It was never about him. He never raised his voice. First thing he asked you when you walked into that pool area was, how are you doing today? What's in your life? And then the second question was, what do you want to work on? So I still do every day the warm-up exercises that he taught me at 11, age 11. And I also just remember how wonderful he was to everybody. And when a couple of my cohorts, who I still keep in touch with from those days, get back together, we always talk about Coach Tom. So, servant leadership, leadership as coach, that's what I'm buying into. And it's a good thing, because I wouldn't be here today if not for that. Because I will tell you that I'm not the smartest person in my company. I'm probably not even the best leader. There are so many people who are just absolutely fabulous. One of my colleagues who we've been together for about, Marion? 29 years. So there's this just sort of power that happens when you realize that you're all in it together and you just bring your best helpful self forward. So that to me is really what good leadership is all about. And that's really all I know. Here's what I don't know, which is the last question when I got the email from Paul. The last question was, because he sort of gives you a little guide, what can we expect from you in the future? And that's the second question that I hate to answer, probably even more than, what makes a good leader, is I have no idea. I really have no idea. I have never had any idea. People like me, and there are a few of us out there, plan for our clients. We plan for our companies, but we don't necessarily plan for ourselves. So over the years, I've had to make peace with that. Or maybe in a few years, I'll get on Teresa Daly's calendar and we'll have it out. But I don't know if I'm equivocating with myself or if this is truly where I am and where I've always been, but I'll just lay it out to you. there's a saying that actually John Beardsley, my old boss, told me one day. This guy was so brilliant, right, Paul? He walked around with an encyclopedia out to here. His avocation was particle physics, and he threw a party when the fourth quark was discovered. That was John. And but his quotes were just fantastic, and one of them he would always bring forward is, "Chance favors the prepared mind." And that quote happened to originate with Louis Pasteur, pasteurization, the scientist, who made more mistakes, than he made successes. So I've carried that with me. Chance favors the prepared mind. Prepared, in my definition, meaning open mind. And then the second piece of how I'm not worried and why I'm not worried about the future is a Chinese character that I have mounted on my desk that I picked up when I was chaperoning a high school trip to China for my daughter. And the character is, no, it's not "May you live in uncertain times" or whatever that one is. It is "Keep learning." Always keep learning. So I figure if I keep an open mind, I'm open to chance occurrences that probably aren't chance anyway, 7 Fs, and keep learning, things will just fall into place. So maybe in 5 years I can tell you how that went, huh? I'm out. Thanks, everybody.
I have Lynn up here with me. I have a few questions based on some of the things that she said in her conversation and some of the things that she didn't say. Last time I checked, you're an empty nester now, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so some of us in the room are empty nesters too. I'm sort of an empty nester. So what do you and Mike do for fun these days?
Well, first of all, I'll take us back 5 years.
Okay.
My first exposure to the 7 Fs.
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about this one.
Yeah.
There was no fun. I was, when you first asked me that and I took a look at the 7 Fs, I went, oh my goodness, what is there? Seriously.
Yeah.
And part of the deal was, at least in my rationalizing mind, was I love what I do. I really, really love what I do. So I don't have that compulsion to seek a lot of other fun things because I'm just kind of all in the work that I do. Mm-hmm. But it really got me thinking. It got me thinking that back then, before 5 years, I used to cook a lot. And the deal was Sunday, because I was always home on a Sunday, was Mom's afternoon and evening in the kitchen. And the deal was whatever I cooked, the kids had to eat. And my promise to myself was that at least one of the dishes would be something I'd never tried before. So it was that kind of putting yourself out. And I just loved it. And we always had my folks over. They were living back then. And I always said dinner was going to be at 7:30, and it was always at 9. But that challenged me to get back into it. So I've reinstated messing in the kitchen Sundays. And that truly is a lot of fun because it's so different. Those of you who cook and you have sort of lives and working worlds where you don't always see an immediate result, it's just a great kind of antidote to that. Plus, and then Tom Kiefer, who's at the table with me, and I share a common passion, maybe some of you all do too, and that is scuba diving. And so at least once a year, which is another thing that I recommitted to when you challenged me, and I challenged myself up here 5 years ago, down there, was I'd let that slide. And it used to be an every year deal. And then it became an every other year deal. And I realized that when I was up here 5 years ago, I hadn't been diving for 3 years. And there was always a great excuse. So I reinstated that passion as well. So Monday morning at 5:22 a.m., not good for a night person. Mike and I are on the plane, and we're going to St. Lucia, and we're strapping the tanks on. And the reef is about 30 feet from shore, which is very unusual. And we're just going to spend most of our time 100 feet below sea level.
Fantastic. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about your work life. We talk about getting people to work together. So good leaders working together with good intentions, that's when great things are possible. You've just put 2 companies together. So can you tell us, what have you learned about your leadership and just about the process of putting two equal companies together that can help us think about that.
All right, so think back, those of you who are married or in committed relationships, and you may be that rare person, but most people I know, including myself, are attracted to somebody because they have qualities that the other lacks. And you are complete as a whole. Mm-hmm. And the thing that most attracts you at some point starts to repel you. You go, seriously? Really? Really? You know,
For the record, that never happens in my life.
Well, Mike and I talk about it all the time because, you know, as you can tell, you know, I kind of have one speed, and that's pretty much high intensity. So I knew that I had to find a mate that was pretty much a type B to my type AA. And, you know, about 2 years into the relationship, I said, Mike, you know, what are you doing? Let's get going. And he's saying, you know, you are bothering me because you've got every minute of our vacation planned. So there you have it. Well, fast forward to about 15 months ago, and we signed a deal with a company that was about our size, that got us heavier into New York and then in DC and LA where we needed some West Coast presence. And values-wise, we were totally the same. We were people-centered. In fact, the reason why we got together was because my counterpart called and said, we're going to do what you guys have done. We're going to become an employee-owned company. We're going to become an ESOP so that we can continue the firm, we can continue to share the spoils with our employees, and we don't have to sell out to the holding companies, which is what a lot of firms do when, you know, their leaders need an exit strategy. So, you know, employee ownership, sharing the wealth, good times and bad, the whole bit. So the foundation was really great. And they were super entrepreneurial. They had grown pretty darn quickly. We are much more steady as you go, plan the work the plan. And they needed processes and systems. They didn't have an HR person. They were 85 people, believe it or not. They had payroll, and then they kind of split the duties up. Because remember, this is the PR world. This is the PR world, folks. We live to serve our clients. Yep. And so a lot of us came from corporate. We understood structures. We understood the importance of having a really strategic human resources function, et cetera, et cetera. So we needed to get a little bit more entrepreneurial. They saw in us how they could get to the next level. Well, entrepreneurialism and structure do not make for a happy marriage. So here we are, we're bringing everything down to the studs, because I thought if we're going to really combine, it's not going to be like in my railroad days, where the Burlington Northern acquired the Frisco in what was called an elegant end-to-end merger. So the BN came down, merged with the Frisco, hooked up somewhere, I think it was Memphis, with Frisco, and then went to Mobile. So a lot of agencies will combine themselves that way, and it would have been very easy for us because we were in industries that they were in, they weren't in industries that we were in, et cetera. But I decided we were just going to bring everything together and make a great new firm. Mm-hmm. So planning process, who's got the best one? None of us are really satisfied with what we have? Great, throw it away, let's do a new one. So it kind of worked like that in a few key areas, but as we went forward, it was clear that this whole entrepreneurial spirit, which basically meant, I want to be left alone, please. And us, which was, we've got to treat everybody fairly. In order to do that, you need systems and processes. Just were big clashes. So Marion and I, and a couple of other people, flew down to Richmond in June. And we had and this was, you know, how long? We'd been to seal the deal in October of the previous year. September, yeah. So it took a while for, you know, the honeymoon, you guys, you know, the forming and then the storming and then the norming of the teams. Okay, well, we were still in the honeymoon until the wheels started to fall off in June. So we went down, we had the best conversation, really hard conversation we've ever had for many hours, and we came out with some things that were on us, they came out with some things that were on them, and we decided that we were going to leave the we, they, in the dust as much as possible and start anew. So we all owned a piece of something, and if we hadn't had that storming phase, the real honeymoon is over. Let's not gloss over any of this. Because remember, Richmond is no different than Minneapolis. You've got very polite people. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been the company that we are today. So I call last year, which was our full year together, the pig and the python year.
Yeah.
You know, the python swallows the pig whole, and I'm sure has this moment of, oh my God, what have I done? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, you know, it takes a while, but the good stuff goes, the bad stuff passes, and you know, you're ready to move on. So that's what 2015 is for us. So
there you go. That's a visual for you, isn't it?
Pig and the python year.
Outstanding. Well, one more question. I think you have been a parent, you have managed your career in that context, and you've given back to our community in amazing ways. That all caused you to be elected into the Minnesota Business Hall of Fame. You're the only speaker we've had who's had that. What have you learned about giving back to the community so much? And you've got some new plans here too, but let me ask you the first question. What have you learned about yourself as a leader by giving so much of your time back to the community?
Well, Tom Kiefer and I were talking about this, which is our sort of mutual failure, I guess you could call it, which is we never met an idea we didn't like. and everything is worth doing. Everybody is worth helping. And, you know, that's just sort of fundamental to who I am. And I joke about it being a flaw, but I just consider it a real gift from God. Mm-hmm. So, and that really wasn't tapped until after I had the conversation with John, my predecessor, who said, come home. I realized I wasn't ready for that yet, did the Center for Creative Leadership thing, and when I came home and took over as leadership of the firm, I realized that I needed to get back in touch with the community because I'd been effectively outside the community. So I took a guy named Bert Cohen out to lunch. Bert is kind of the godfather behind just about everything. Talk about a servant leader. Mm-hmm. Everything that happens in the Twin Cities. Former publisher now, publisher emeritus of Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, MSP Communications. So I thought it was going to be one of those, Bert, will you mentor me? And we sat down for lunch, and he looked at me and he said, where's Padilla been for the last 10 years? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, I don't see you guys around. And he, and later other people have confirmed this, he said, there wasn't anything that happened in this community back in the day that Don Padilla and Dave Spear weren't somehow involved in. And he said that was the spirit that your firm was created in, and you guys have kind of lost it. And I realized that my predecessor, who was quite brilliant, had a different community that he chose to participate in, and it was our National Professional Association. If you remember John,
oh, yeah.
he was one of the first professional associations that were up on the internet that had a website, because that was sort of John's thing. So so I came in and I was shocked. Remember, I hadn't paid too much attention to this community. So Bert said, go back and take a look at the client list in your community 10 years previous and take a look at it today. And I realized when I did that there were very few Fortune 500s, and we were growing our business out of town at a pretty rapid pace, and maybe we were leaving some relationships on the table locally. So, and that's a strategy that if it was a strategy, that would have been a fine strategy. Mm-hmm. But it really wasn't a strategy. It was a strategy of neglect. Mm-hmm. So I thought to myself, I got to get busy. So I called Bert back and I said, so what do I do? And he says, first of all, he said, do you have it in your heart to put skin in the game in this community? Roll up your sleeves and try to make it a better place because you're there. And I said, I am so in. And he said, good. He said, because you have to come at this not falsely. He said, once you make yourself available, and I'm fortunate, and those of us in my business are, because typically community boards, nonprofit boards, and public companies as well, usually need somebody who has our skills and experience, either to help them build their brands or protect their reputations. So I just sort of got caught up in a lot of good things in the community, and one of those you just never know until you're really there. I didn't plan to be on executive committees. I didn't plan to chair the boards, but have kind of found myself in those capacities. Mm-hmm. And it's been just a real joy. And every once in a while, actually every year when I take myself out to lunch and do my goals, it was, are you staying clear to what this is all about? Mm-hmm. Because we all know people who go into these things and into the community with the idea of building business, and you can just smell them. And I want to make sure that that is absolutely not my deal and not my company's deal. So I think we've actually aced that one. And for everybody in our company, because it is a tacit requirement at a certain level to be able to give back in the community, exercise their leadership chops outside the company, it's been a real gift. So I have Bert Cohen to thank for that.
Outstanding. Well, before we finish, our firm, Good Leadership Enterprises, is the coffee sponsor today. And part of that is that we have a $500 that we're going to give to your favorite charity for you being here as the speaker. So where are you going to direct that dollar?
Well, okay. So this is really, really tough. I have some friends here from the Minneapolis Foundation, whose board I used to chair. I have some friends from the University of Minnesota Foundation, whose board I am on. And I have some friends here from the United Way, whose board I will chair, following Richard Davis at U.S. Bank. That's going to be tough next year. So I'm thinking, what do I do? And I realized that I'm going to give it to the United Way. Because the United Way raises the next generation of givers through their workplace campaigns. They do a lot more outside the workplace, but that's how I started giving money. There was church tithing, but that wasn't quite in the same spirit. This was truly, this is what you need to do in order to be a community member. And if the United Way did not exist, we would not have the generations of givers who then could go on to make money enough to give back to the University of Minnesota and the Minneapolis Foundation. So there you have it.
Outstanding. Great. Well, now, excellent.